Well, okay. All right, good afternoon. In a short while, you hear from our guest, Georgios Petropoulos, who, as you know, is the head of our sub-office in Gaza for the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. He'll join you from Jerusalem to talk to you about the situation in Gaza. Tomorrow afternoon, if you want to put it in your books, there'll be a press briefing by Leonardo Santos Shimao, who is our special envoy for West Africa, and he'll be at the stakeout after his briefing to the Council. You heard this morning from the Secretary General on Syria. He said that the Middle East is now being consumed by many fires, but today there is a flame of hope in Syria, and we share that hope with the Syrian people, and we stand by them, he said. The political transition ahead must be by Syrians and for Syrians, Mr. Guterres added. It must be inclusive, it must be credible, it must be peaceful, and the process must be guided by the underlying principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. We at the United Nations, he said, are focused on facilitating such a process, adding that he had been in close contact with a number of leaders from the region and beyond. Mr. Guterres also announced the appointment of Carla Quintana of Mexico to head the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria. She and her team must be allowed to carry out their mandate, he said, and we sent out an official announcement on that a bit earlier. Mr. Guterres also warned that if the ongoing situation is not managed carefully by the Syrian people themselves, with the support of the international community, there is a real risk that progress could unravel. He also stressed that adequate funding for humanitarian and recovery response is critical and made a strong appeal to the international community to show the generosity of the Syrian people because they deserve it in this moment, and to massively support the humanitarian response in Syria. The $4 billion humanitarian response plan for 2024 is only 33% funded, with just over 1.3 billion US dollars received. Just to give you a bit more granularity on the humanitarian front, Tom Fletcher, the head of the Humanitarian Department and the Emergency Relief Coordinator, continues his trip to Syria, though he's currently on his way to Turkey as we speak, wrapping up his visit to Syria. In Ankara, he's scheduled to have discussions with officials there, obviously on the recent developments in the region, especially in Syria. During his trip to Syria beyond Damascus, where you know he was, he traveled to Idlib in the northwest, where he visited a camp for displaced people. Mr. Fletcher met with families who voiced their need for immediate services and for their rehabilitation of their homes and land before they could return to their places of origin. Unexploded ordnances pose a major risk to civilians, including children, as we've been telling you repeatedly, and they must be cleared, Mr. Fletcher said. We and our partners are responding as security and logistical conditions permit it. Since November 27th, more than 1.3 million human beings have received food aid across the country. Those include hot meals. However, the rapid devaluation of the Syrian currency has impacted availability of food. In Aleppo, bakeries have resumed activities to nearly full capacity, but partners report that they have seen long queues and overcrowding at these bakeries. OCHA also reports that the rehabilitation of key facilities has begun in relatively stable areas in the northwest, including hospitals in Homs and road repairs in Aleppo. The water supply in Aleppo was also restored yesterday following a 6-day suspension, thanks to help from our UNICEF colleagues and the International Red Committee for the Red Cross. In Hama, 30 health facilities remain non-functional. In northeast Syria, 14 health facilities continue to be suspended due to reports of vandalism, looting, and just lack of access to these facilities. Other health facilities maintain only basic services due to severe shortages of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, which is making a horrific situation even worse for the 44,000 displaced people in that region. Our humanitarian colleagues also inform us that evacuation orders by Israeli army triggered displacement in southern Syria. According to partners, some villages in Quneitra governorate saw 40% of their residents having to leave. OCHA repeats that those fleeing fighting must be allowed to do so safely and voluntary return when the situation allows, and if they choose to stay, they must also be protected. For her part, the Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Najat Roshdi, engaged in a virtual town hall with over 200 Syrian young people, half of whom were women, and they were both from Syria and from the diaspora. The event highlighted the critical role that young people will play in Syria's transition, focusing on their aspirations and their concerns for the future. Key issues raised included the need for inclusive governance in line with Resolution 2254, justice, accountability, and ensuring the representation of youth. Also this morning, the Secretary General spoke to Security Council members on artificial intelligence and the maintenance of peace and security. He said that AI is not just reshaping our world, it is revolutionizing it, but he warned that the risks are huge as AI rapid growth is outpacing our ability to govern it, raising fundamental questions about accountability, about safety, about security. Artificial intelligence without human oversight would leave the world blind, he said, and perhaps nowhere more dangerously and recklessly than in global peace and security. The Secretary General also added that humans must always retain control over decision-making functions guided by international law. And he also urged member states to move swiftly in establishing the International Scientific Panel on AI and launching the global dialogue on AI governance within the United Nations. The Secretary General also sent a video message today to participants at a meeting in Cairo, and that was the 11th summit of the D8 Organization for Economic Cooperation. The D8, also known as the Developing Eight, brings together Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Turkey. In his message, he spoke about a range of topics, including Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon, and the wider region. He said that peace, hope, and a better future for the people of the region and our world are fundamental, adding that as the summit's themes this year focuses on the future, that means investing in youth, in their ideas, energy, and meaningful participation. Investing in education, in skills, and training for young people is a vital part of that. You'll hear more about Gaza from Giorgio, but I did want to flag a couple of things for you. Our OCHA colleagues tell us that hostilities around the Gaza Strip continue to cause widespread death and destruction, including in Al-Mawasi, where Israeli forces have been pushing people to leave or to move. There have been reports of heavy fire in this area on Monday and Tuesday, which also impacted the premises of a number of humanitarian organizations. One field hospital was forced to suspend services on Tuesday, but resumed operations yesterday. Across Gaza, we and our partners face restrictions and other conditions that are severely impeding aid operations. Today, Israeli authorities denied another UN request to reach besieged areas north of North Gaza with food and water. As a result, Palestinians in Beit Hanun, in Beit Lahiya, and parts of Jabalia remain cut off from essential assistance they need to survive. Once again, we stress that facilitating humanitarian assistance as well as commercial goods, both into and within the Gaza Strip, and ensuring aid operations can be carried out safely, is essential to address the needs of people. Turning to another horrific situation, and that is the one of hunger in Sudan, which is only worsening. The World Food Programme warned today that Sudan risks becoming the world's largest hunger crisis in recent history and the only place globally where famine has been confirmed today. The agency explains that nearly 1.7 million people across the country either face famine or are at risk of famine. As you know, famine is happening in North Darfur Zamzam camp, while 13 other areas are at risk of famine. The 14 famine and risk of famine areas are concentrated in places where fighting is the worst. So one can only imagine that makes reaching people with assistance that much more dangerous and that much more unpredictable. To put this in context, 25.6 million men, women, and children, that's over half of the population, are acutely food insecure. This is the highest food insecurity ever recorded by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System in Sudan. On top of that, 1 in every 2 people globally facing catastrophic levels of hunger live in Sudan. That's more than 750,000 Sudanese. According to record, 4.7 million children under the age of 5. 4.7 million children under the age of 5, and pregnant and breastfeeding women and girls are suffering from acute malnutrition. WFP has surged its operations across Sudan, part of a scale-up effort to reach millions of people in the country most needy and in the most conflict areas, isolated conflict areas. In October, the World Food Program reached 2.8 million people, the highest number recorded for any given month since the start of the conflict in mid-April 2023. WFP calls on world leaders to treat Sudan crisis with the urgency it deserves before it further destabilizes an already fragile region. The international community must step up attention, diplomatic efforts, and funding. For its part, and outside of the borders of Sudan, our colleagues at the UN Refugee Agency tell us that they, alongside their partners, continue to work closely with governments and national and local organizations in neighboring countries to respond to the needs of more than 3 million new refugees, asylum seekers, and returnees who have crossed the border to seek safety. People's most urgent needs are water, food, shelter, health, and cash assistance, as well as protection services. In particular, dire health situation among new arrivals is increasingly concerning and requires urgent attention. Just to note that our Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, will brief the Security Council in an open meeting on Sudan at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. He will do that remotely from Turkey. And on the diplomatic front, we are also active. The Secretary General's personal envoy for Sudan, Ramtam Lamamra, concluded his meetings in Mauritania, in the capital Nouakchott. He attended the third consultative meeting on enhanced coordination of peace initiatives and efforts for Sudan. Mr. Lamamra said it is our collective responsibility to do everything possible to end the heartbreaking suffering in Sudan, which has been ongoing for too long. Participants, for their part, emphasized the pressing need to reach a ceasefire in Sudan for achieving peace and stability in the country. They urged the warring parties to fully adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law and their commitments made in the Jeddah Declaration. The participants also reaffirmed their intention to coordinate and intensify their efforts. Turning to South Sudan, the peacekeeping mission there is alarmed by rising tensions in the Tambora region in western Equatoria State. It urges all involved parties to demonstrate restraint. Meanwhile, peacekeepers are patrolling day and night and are supporting humanitarian partners who are providing urgent assistance. Unfortunately, in addition to reported casualties, these recent developments have led to an influx of people in the internally displaced persons camp adjacent to the mission's temporary operating base and several other similar camps. The mission said it will continue engaging with authorities, political actors, security personnel, community, and faith-based leaders to try to diffuse the current tensions. Turning to Mozambique, where humanitarian colleagues tell us that additional resources are urgently needed to support the people impacted by tropical cyclone Chido in the country. According to the government's latest figures, the cyclone impacted more than 329,000 people, with some 52,000 homes having been either damaged or destroyed. We and our partners are working to scale up the response, and despite funding shortfalls, UN agencies have distributed shelter and non-food items to at least 10,000 people, and the UN's mobile medical clinics in Cabo Delgado province has provided primary health care consultation to some 1,500 people who need it. In Mikufi, also in Cabo Delgado, UNICEF and partners have distributed nutrition supplies for 6,000 children, as well as water, sanitation, and hygiene kits for 5,000 people. Turning to another disaster, and that is in Vanuatu, where the emergency relief coordinator, Tom Fletcher, today allocated $1 million from our central emergency response fund to support immediate response to efforts following the earthquake. The funds will go towards providing water, shelter, and food. Meanwhile, our humanitarian colleagues inform us that aftershocks and transport disruptions are challenging aid operations. Telecoms and water supply networks are not operating in some areas of Vanuatu. We are supporting the national response, including through the Pacific Humanitarian Aviation Service that's being activated to transport humanitarian personnel and cargo from Fiji to Port Vila in Vanuatu. For its part, UNICEF and its partners have supported delivery of tanks to ensure I guess, of water tanks, not tanks, of water tanks to ensure continued access to clean water, as well as we mentioned yesterday. A disaster assessment coordination team is being mobilized for Vanuatu. That's it. Serife, since I failed to call on you earlier today. Oh, it's good to know.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a question regarding the leader of the former Syrian regime, Assad. The destruction he has left behind is becoming clearer each day as mass graves are being uncovered, and his location is actually rather well known. So I'd like to know if the United Nations will have a call for legal proceedings or have an initiative to start to hold him accountable for his crimes. Thank you.
There are a number of UN mechanisms that are meant to hold people to account, and people will need to be held to account for crimes committed in Syria, whether it is the various courts that the UN has, their commission of inquiries, other mechanisms. Accountability will be needed for the sake of the Syrian people who have suffered so long. Edie and then Gabriel.
Steph, a follow-up to the Secretary General's announcement of the new head of the investigative mission looking into missing persons in Syria from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
When is she going to be? I believe her name is Mrs. Quintana. Yes.
Yes, it is Mrs. It is indeed Mrs. Quintana.
Do we know when she's going to take up her job, where she's going to be based?
My assumption is that she'll be based in Geneva, where her colleagues already are based. She'll be taking up her job as soon as possible. But what needs to be made clear is, I know we've all been waiting for the name of the leader of this mechanism, but it has been up and running in the recent past. Since its establishment, they've been conducting search tasks such as mapping actors with relevant information, registration. So they've been doing a lot of things out of Geneva, given that they had obviously no access to Syria. The changes that we've seen in the last weeks will obviously lead to a scaling up of their activities, and I hope she will be coming on board as quickly as possible. But as I mentioned, there's a team in place that has not been wasting any time.
And can one assume that she will be spending time in Syria?
One can and should assume that. Maggie, and then Javier.
Just continuing on that, do you know how many people are on the team already in Geneva on the IIM?
No, we could find out what the staffing is, but they already have a number of technical experts, and I think. But I'll try to get you a number.
So she's not an investigator, but she still has to determine the fate and whereabouts of the missing.
Yeah.
So do you have like a little more description of, because the resolution from the GA didn't really describe in detail. It just says determine the fate and whereabouts. It doesn't really say much about.
I mean, their mandate is to clarify the fate and whereabouts of all missing persons. All missing persons in Syria fall under the mandate of the institution, regardless of their nationality, meaning whether they're Syrian or they're not Syrian, regardless of any political affiliation or reason for their detention. The way they will work is really adopt a victim-centered approach, working with families, anyone who has any information, but really to help support the families both with information and anything else they can find out. Right now, what they're working on is capturing, gathering information, engaging with Syrian and international actors to ensure the rapid protection and the preservation of information, data, sites, and vital relevance, such as burial sites. I think the securing of information is really critical. I think we saw images from Sidnaya prison with papers being all over the place. I think it's very important for the authorities currently in charge in Damascus and other parts of Syria to secure all of that information, not only for this commission, but for the issues of accountability moving forward. And voilà.
Well, I was just going to say, did the de facto authorities, did anyone from the UN discuss her appointment with the de facto authorities, or did they express any assurances that they will work
Well, I mean,
with this
this is all parts of
commission?
this is all part of the ongoing dialogue. I don't know if the specific issue was raised by Mr. Pedersen, but the issue of missing persons in general was raised by Mr. Pedersen with the previous with Mr. Assad and his ministers, and I have no doubt it is being raised again today. It is such an emotional issue. It is such a human issue that it should be on the forefront of everyone's work.
And is there overlap between the COI for Syria and the IIMP? Because they seem to sort of do the same thing.
I think the Commission of Inquiry has a broader mandate. This one is really just focused on missing persons, on working with families. It's not the first time that in the history of the UN we've had different organizations have somewhat overlap. The key issue is that they all work in the same direction to answer the most basic question that people have is, where's my loved one? Where's my husband? Where's my wife? Where are my children? Perfect. Thank you, Deji.
Yes, another topic. Today, the Russian President Putin, when answering the questioning of the Oreshnik ballistic missiles, he proposed what he called high-tech duel of the 21st century to see whether the Western defense system could intercept that missiles in Kiev. What is Secretary General's position on this rhetoric? Is that probably an escalation of the crisis?
I mean, we have seen an expansion of kinetic activity in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. We've seen an expansion of rhetoric. We would like to see both of those go in the opposite direction.
So President Putin also said that he's willing to talk based on the Istanbul consensus. Do you think maybe they should engage some kind of talk first?
Look, it's not for us to comment on that. I mean, I think you know very well.
But UN will facilitate.
The Secretary General has said from day one that his good officers are available, like they are in any conflict, provided both parties to the conflict want the United Nations involved. I mean, I'm happy to repeat my standard answer, but I think you know it, that we want to see an end to this conflict in line with General Assembly resolutions, in line with international law, and in line with territorial integrity. And the UN Charter. Thank you, Deji. Yes, please.
Thank you. How does the UN assess the potential impacts on Europe's energy security due to Zelensky's decision not to extend the 5-year deal to ship Russian gas across Ukraine?
Look, it's not for the Secretary General to comment on how on the issue of commercial agreements and how Europe gets its gas. So we're not going to comment on that.
Thank you so much. Russia has proposed to its partners in Syria to use its military bases to deliver humanitarian aid. Are you ready to cooperate with?
The issue of one country having military bases and another is a bilateral issue between two member states. Obviously, we will work with the Syrian authorities, the transitional authorities in Damascus, to see how we can best support them for humanitarian aid access. They've already given us the green light to use as many border crossings as we can to help facilitate that. That will be a discussion they will need to have with the Russian Federation. Ephraim.
Thank you, Steph. I asked you this question before, but it came up again today with the Secretary General and also with an interview that some of the de facto leaders are giving about sanctions. Like they're asking for sanctions to be lifted immediately. We're still hearing here about certain conditions to be met before sanctions are lifted. Could you tell us what conditions need to be met before sanctions are lifted according to the UN?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about bilateral sanctions, whether it's US, EU sanctions, what conditions they feel they need to put on removing those sanctions, that's up to them. That's a question to ask them. I think the Secretary General took a very human-centered approach in answer to the question on sanctions, is that these sanctions were put in place when there was a different government in Syria, to put it mildly. The Syrian people are in need of humanitarian aid. We need that support. They also need to rebuild their economies. He feels that movement should be seen on both sides that would lead to an improvement of the situation. As for the delisting, which is more of a UN issue, that's up to a decision up to member states to take. Dulcie, and then we'll go to Mike online, then I'll come back here.
Thanks very much. Yesterday, Linda Thomas-Greenfield said in the Security Council that the UN needed to start a conversation with the Israelis regarding UNRWA and whether how the Knesset ban will affect UNRWA's operations. I believe she said the conversation needed to start. Has there been such a conversation?
I think we've been discussing this issue at all levels for quite some time. Our colleagues in UNRWA, our resident humanitarian coordinator, Mohamed Hadi, has been trying to get information from the Israelis as to how exactly these Knesset bills are going to be implemented. I don't think we have much clarity. What we are clear on is that UNRWA remains vital to delivering not only humanitarian services, but education and health services, not only in Gaza, but of course, as you know, in the occupied West Bank, as well as East Jerusalem. We don't feel there's a replacement for it. None of the UN agencies have the capacity to replace the work of UNRWA.
But she seemed to put the onus on the UN to resolve
Well,
this
I'm not,
problem. I mean, she wasn't acknowledging, she was basically saying that the Knesset bans are here to stay.
Well,
So
we fully understand the legislative process in Israel. We have been in discussions and we've been talking to the Israelis. We don't always, the Israeli government, we don't always get a response, but we're fully aware of the political and the security environment in which we're trying to deliver humanitarian assistance and development assistance to those who need it. Mike.
Continuing along the line of questioning from Dulcie there regarding UNRWA and Linda Thomas-Greenfield's comments yesterday, she seemed to indicate her perspective is this is a fait accompli. This is a done deal, in fact. Along the lines of your conversations with the Israeli government and Israeli officials, has that been a topic of conversation can we delay this? Can we amend this? Or is the conversation pretty much set in, these laws are going into effect in 40-some days, here's what we got to do to prepare for it?
Well,
is there any room for maneuvering there?
Listen, the room for maneuver is a question you should ask members of the Israeli government. We don't have a vote in, the UN doesn't have a vote in the UN doesn't have a vote in the Knesset to state the obvious. What is also clear, on top of what I just told Dulcie, is that according to international law, should Israel not allow UNRWA to perform its work, not allow UN to perform its work as mandated in occupied territories, it would be up to the Israeli authorities to provide educational services, to provide health services. That's our position, and I would encourage you to read in detail the letter the Secretary General sent to both the President of the General Assembly and the head of the President of the Security Council about 10 days ago, which is now a public document, which I think is a very clear and very clear outline of the UN's position. But are we talking to the Israelis? Of course we are.
So I just am trying to be as clear as possible in an unclear situation. When that deadline hits and the laws are implemented, are you saying on behalf of the UN that whatever UNRWA does, whatever UNRWA has done up until that date, the UN will no longer take responsibility for any of that? All of those sectors, education, everything goes over to Israel and no UN agency will participate? Is that-
What I'm saying to you is that UNRWA has a mandate given to it by the General Assembly of the United Nations, right, which has been renewed over the years. We don't know what's going to happen at that when the law comes into effect, and that's some of the things we've been trying to get, the details we've been trying to get, operational details. So UNRWA continues to proceed as is. Let's be clear. UNICEF cannot step in and replace the 2,000, I think, teachers, UNRWA teachers or so that are working for UNRWA in West Bank schools. It cannot. WHO cannot replace the hundreds, if not more, of Palestinian health professionals that work in UNRWA clinics. It's just it's not possible. So we all have our positions. We want to help the people we are mandated to help. We want to fulfill our mandate given to us by the General Assembly. If we're not able to fulfill that mandate, that will fall. That responsibility will fall to the people who have the authority over occupied lands. Edie.
Thank you, sir.
And then Maggie.
Thank you, Steph. Going back to Ms. Quintana and her
Yeah.
new job, will her team be doing actual excavations of graves and DNA identification work?
It's a very good question. We'll put you in touch with her office who can answer that granularity. Margaret Bashir.
Thanks. I believe that the Israeli ambassador replied to the Secretary General today, perhaps. And in the letter, he says that they aren't occupying Gaza. So I suppose that means they're not planning to provide assistance. So if they don't step up and the UN has to step back, what's going to happen?
Look, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, but I think one can all imagine. I mean, I think we're not looking to shirk our responsibilities. We're not looking for fights, so to speak. We are looking to keep working on our mandate. We are looking to keep helping the Palestinian civilians we need to help. We are mandated to help with food, with health, with education. And we hope that we will be able to continue to do that. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. I just have a rather, hopefully it won't be boring, housekeeping question.
As long as it doesn't involve mechanical stairs.
No, I don't do stairs.
Okay, tell me. Drones? No. Yeah.
Can you just give us any update in terms of the SG's holiday plans and in January travel plans? And if at this juncture, if you assume that he'll be going to Washington, I think
Okay,
traditionally.
I don't have any updates for you on those travel plans. The Secretary General will spend the holidays with his family at home in Portugal. What I can tell you, and I think I've told you, that there will be a press conference here on the 16th of January, and any other plans we will share with you. Deji, quickly, and then Abdelhamid online.
Yes,
and then we'll
very quick
close it.
follow-up. Will the SG have to visit Damascus in the short term?
I have absolutely no information for you. Abdelhamid, then we'll go to our guest in Jerusalem, who's been very patient.
Thank you, Stéphane. Israel has been bombing critical areas, especially energy stations in Yemen. Do you have any statement of that?
We're very concerned about the exchange of missiles that we've seen between the Houthis and Israel. We saw Houthis launch missiles at Israel. One of them hit a school in central Israel. We've seen Israel launch missiles at ports and other facilities in Yemen, which led to fatalities and what we understand destruction of a number of infrastructure. This is all part of a very dangerous escalation, which frankly worries us, and we would like to see de-escalation, and we would like to see a return to the support of all the parties to the work of Mr. Grunberg. And I do expect a fuller statement on this issue a bit later on today. Okay, we will go to our guest. Yorgos, are you still with us and patient? If we could put him on the